Today is the November 16th Curriculum Subcommittee meeting of the Brookline School Committee. The members of the subcommittee are myself, Helen Trelupski, Stephen Ehrenberg, and Susan Wolf-Ditkoff are the members. And thank you to our staff who are attending. I see we have Leslie Ryan Miller, Michelle Herman, Gabe McCormick, and Casey No Miller with us currently, as well as Robin Coyne, who is our amazing executive assistant of all things school committee. So we're going to get started with approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes today, the approval of the September 21st, 2021 meeting and the October 19th, 2021 school curriculum subcommittee minutes. Are there any questions? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Great. Let's take a vote. Helen?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you. Wonderful piece of business. Our next item on, well, it's just to give folks an overview of the agenda. If there are some folks who haven't seen it, we'll be getting an update on the timeline of goals for the Office of Teaching and Learning, and then a brief update on the request for proposals for the middle school review. And then we'll have a district presentation on K-5 literacy, teaching, and learning. So Leslie, would you like to start off the timeline update?
I'd love to. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen. Oh, whoops. Robin, could I have permission to share my screen? So just while we're getting ready for that, last time we were together, we shared a progress tracker for our goals and timeline for work. And so one of the things I'm hoping to do is just update the committee on our progress, any challenges that we might be encountering, successes that we're having, so that you're aware of the work and where we are as we move forward. Let me see if I can, now I can share, hold on one second.
While you're pulling that up, as we have more attendees coming in, I just wanted to welcome everyone who's coming in from the attendees, and we're starting our update on the Office of Teaching and Learning goals. Thanks, Leslie.
Yep. So, we'll make sure, if it's not already, that this is in your materials for the school committee members. But just as we did before, if you remember last time with our initial share of this, we just outlined our goals and then showed our progress for the month of October, and just remembering just what the key is here. So red means we have some factors beyond our control that we're really dealing with when thinking about the status of these activities and these goals. Yellow, we're proceeding, but we have some challenges. Green, proceeding as expensive as expected. And black means that we just haven't started that particular work. There could be a plethora of reasons, but just because of the vast amount of work, there are just some things maybe we haven't got to quite yet. So I just wanted to highlight, and I'll be pretty brief here, just reminding everyone what our goals are. Goal 1 is around identifying and implementing our K-8 essential curriculum. And then you'll see here we have completed activities, upcoming activities, the action steps related. Goal 2, manage and ensure compliance for all federal grants that serve as a funding source for OTL. So as we talked about, OTL is funded on a number of grants, Title 1, 2, 3, 4, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Also, we have some IDEA funding that we are using to support some of the work that is collectively in a collaboration with the Office of Student Services. Goal 3 is around conducting a review of our middle school model. Goal 4, update the educator evaluation systems and technology platforms and provide professional development opportunities to evaluators related to the educator evaluation, observation, and feedback system. Goal 5 is around leveraging child study teams and our work around disproportionality. And then goal 6 is creating and implementing a robust menu of professional development opportunities for educators in support of their practice. So I think, and then also I should scroll down at the bottom, we just have some additional items that are not small items, but not necessarily action steps or related to the goals that are mentioned, but they're considerable bodies of work that will also update you on a few of those today as well. So I'm going to go back up. I'm going to go to line 21 here. What I wanted to do today is just highlight a few of the higher leverage items that we've completed where our goal status has changed. So starting with the middle school RFP, we have done a considerable amount of work there. Shout out to Gabe McCormick, who has been the lead on that. One of the things that I'm most proud of with this is I think our RFP is ready to go. If it's not ready, it's super close to being ready to go so that we can get it out and see what organization is going to support us in this work. But I'm really proud to say that we've engaged a number of constituents around the RFP, and the feedback has been tremendous and I think has really strengthened the RFP. So we have feedback from this committee, the curriculum subcommittee, from senior staff, from our curriculum coordinators. We've shared it with principals, but just recently. So we will give them another couple of days to give us some feedback. And then also we've engaged with BEU leadership and a number of middle school teachers that gave, again, really helpful feedback that I think made this a very strong proposal. So I'm not going to talk too much about this because Gabe is going to go more in depth on the next agenda item. Then I'm gonna scroll down to, this isn't a huge step, but this is work that I'm really excited about and I think is going to be a huge lever in our disproportionality work. We finally have a date on the calendar to meet with our CST leaders. And so I'm really excited about that. Sharing a survey with them to get our initial date to meet. I also just asked for some feedback around what's on their mind, what are some topics that we need to make sure that we address. And so along with the action steps that are listed here, there was a lot of just feedback around ways we can really streamline the CST process, what seems to be working, some areas of challenge for that team. I mean, being a CST leader and just being on a CST team, it's a tremendous job. It's a really high leverage job, but it's a tremendous amount of work. And so I'm really looking forward to meeting with the CST leaders on Friday. And then we will talk about what some of our next steps are. We're going to do a SWOT analysis of what's working, what's not. But one of the other things that I think was really helpful just to me as I was seeing in terms of what's working and areas for improvement, a lot of the same feedback from the CST leaders. And so that's really going to help us to streamline our work as we think about what needs to happen next on that particular goal. And then let's see, line 44. Yes.
Leslie, could you just
Yes.
define what SWOT is?
Yes, strengths, opportunities, and threat analysis. So it's really just an overview again of things that are working and then areas for growth, areas of challenge, things that we need to be mindful of. So that will give us a good starting point on where we need to go next so that we can plan accordingly. And then line 44, just discussion about the dyslexia screener. So this is a collaboration between the Office of Student Services and the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so we have just really needed to do some work amongst ourselves to make sure that we're on the same page and being thoughtful about how we move forward. And so what we have completed that Michelle is going to share with you in a moment is just an outline for the process and the timeline for the screener selection. And then just we wanted to have, again, a common understanding of the purpose of the screener and the guidelines. So one thing I've noticed is in our meetings, sometimes we kind of veer off and then we're like, let's bring it back. What are we supposed to be doing? What does the screener do? And so, I also wanted to just shout out, I have been able to meet with a few members of the community that have been really helpful in just giving us alternate perspectives. And quite frankly, giving us some critiques on our work, right, before it really hits the public. And so I've been really thankful that we have the ear of some folks who are willing to give us feedback and work with us as we think about what this will look like going forward, because this is important work. We want to roll it out right. And we want to make sure that when we roll it out, it is going to do what it's supposed to do and support students. So Michelle, can I turn it over to you? I can stop sharing.
Sure. Yeah. If you stop sharing, I'm just going to put the document up that I shared with everybody today. Let's see. So as Leslie said, we've been working on our timeline to really look at what is it that we are, let me move this over and make it bigger. That should be better. So we've been working basically on our timeline. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to sit down and say, like, what is Massachusetts? What are the guidelines? What is it telling us? So I want to be really clear that the state law, just to make sure everybody understands, the state law was to write a set of guidelines. It was not that every district has to implement. And so I want to be clear about that, but we think it's super important for us to be implementing a dyslexia screener so that we can identify students that are at risk of falling behind in reading and learning to become learning their literacy skills. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood that the law was about writing these guidelines, but we believe in the process. So a couple of things, just looking through here, this is all language from the state. This is nothing that we've written ourselves here, but wanted to kind of condense some of the highlighted areas that are in the very long document that's sitting here, just to give highlights to people. So the first thing is, what's the purpose of having of the dyslexia guidelines, and what's in the document? So they talk about a set of screening guidelines. And so students, including students demonstrating one or more potential signs of a neurological disability, including but not limited to dyslexia. So what it is not to identify that a student is dyslexic or to identify that they have a specific disability, but to identify that they are at risk. They also provide a framework of what should we do once we have a student deemed at risk, and then resources for support. So that's what's inside the document. I also just included here, and my computer's just being slow. What I've also included here is both the definition of dyslexia and some information about Massachusetts. So I'm not going to read this definition to you here, but dyslexia is a neurobiological piece that students experience. And in Massachusetts, they also have label for learning disability that is a specific learning disability, and dyslexia falls under that. And so just so that you understand that when we're talking about specific learning disabilities in Massachusetts, it's a piece that they've also deemed that dyslexia falls under. And then this is the piece that I think is important. So as a team, we've been thinking about what does it mean and what are those guiding criteria that we need to identify our screener. So these are the three, yes, these are the three the three subgroups of dyslexia written here in terms of identification, but all of these pieces under here are what we look for in identifying a student that is at risk. And so we use that and some other guidelines with some other specifics within the guidelines to actually build out the criteria for determining what's the best screener. And then finally, just two other things that I want to share with you. One is here where it talks, the purpose of the screener. So one of the things that you've heard me say is students at risk. So the screener itself does not determine whether a student has dyslexia or not. The screener itself will determine who is at a higher risk for potentially having dyslexia. And so it is just the first piece of the puzzle. And then the significance of the risk. Where are the challenges for the student? And then specifically what skills within these areas might we be looking at when we look at a student who's dyslexic? And then the final thing is, it's not done in isolation. So Massachusetts, part of the guidelines is having an effective team to also look at these results and look at how a student performs and what needs to be done next. So this is just a suggested list of who is on the team. And we have supported this as a way to look at our teams. And if you look at our CST teams right now, this is very similar to the makeup of those teams. So where I want to leave you is, where are we at as a district in terms of a timeline? So in September, we gathered a group, and the group includes people from Casey's department, people from teaching and learning, our reading specialists, includes a group, and some school psychologists. And we've all gotten together, and as a group, we determined that we needed to understand the purpose of the guidelines and the criteria for identifying a district screener. This month, we have gotten together to begin to determine which 3 screeners we are going to look at for further review. I do not have those 3 screeners today because people are out doing that work now, and we're going to come together on the 29th to look at the results of the information we got. We're also reaching out to our neighboring districts. So what is Wellesley doing? What is Newton doing? To find out what their practice is as well, because many districts are in the same process we are now. In December, we're going to look at our stakeholders. So make sure that other teachers and reading specialists and other educators are engaged to see that it meets their needs. And some of the pieces that we're looking at is like, how difficult is the screener to administer to a student? How long does it take? How easy is the dashboard that we get with information, and how quickly can we decipher what a student needs? January through March, we're going to look at the screener based on feedback. We're going to create an implementation plan. So the screener is just step 1. It's what you do with the information once you get it. Where does the student go next? What are the protocols that are involved? And then if a student's identified at risk during the process, to support the student and really diagnose what is the issue, or is it not dyslexia, but what other supports do they need? We'll continue to support the student. And then we're going to look at our CST teams and self-selected teachers and have them try this out and find out what are we learned from it. In April, we plan to come and update you again. We'll also be training our teachers who are our identified stakeholders who are going to practice this, collect data on our implementation, and then provide a final report to you in June on the outcomes of the pilot, so that we can, oops, something got cut off, but I will put that back on. But we want to provide teachers with clear communication about the expectations and the use towards next year, which is what that last line said before I cut it off. So I'm going to stop sharing, because I know there's a lot there, and just see if there are any specific questions that people have. Or
Are there any members of the committee who have questions specifically about this section of work on the goals and the dyslexia screener?
And I should also add, one thing that we talked a lot about before was the release of our K-5 scope and sequences. And so I didn't update you on that, but we finally got some dates for feedback sessions. That's going to be critically important so that we can get educators' feedback as we look to solidify those scope and sequences. Although I'll be really transparent with you that at the last principals meeting, principals shared that teachers are really, it's a lot of content. And so we may need to make some adjustments again for this year as we did last year. So for instance, tomorrow I'm going to meet with the KN1 teachers at Lincoln about how they're doing with the scope and sequence and some challenges that they're having. So while we thought that this might be the year to really kind of pilot that scope and sequence, we might have to veer off of what we've shared just because of the needs of our students and the way that our educators need to respond to those needs.
Leslie, do you think that that's true for all grades in the scope and sequence work?
I do, and we're at least in K-8 at the after the Thanksgiving break. We're going to release some ways in which educators might narrow the units and what's taught, but ensure that we're really hitting those essential standards, the power standards. And it's very much like the work that happened last year. So teachers are familiar with that. I think, you know, to be honest, one thing that happened was when we came back to school this year, at least I was like, we're going back. It's not totally normal, but it's pretty close to normal, and it's not. And so the scope and sequence that we released were for normal times, right? It was a lot of content. And I think that we need to slow things down. We need to focus on our children's social emotional wellness, which means we have to slow the curriculum down, which doesn't mean that we're forsaking anything. It means that we're going deep and making sure that children know what they need to know in order to go to the next grade. So that was a long answer to your question, Jen.
I'll just very quickly say that there's almost exactly the same conversation happening at the high school right now, and a very parallel issue. The specifics of it are a little bit different because of the nature of high school, but the same idea that we need to attend to students' social and emotional health, and that this is not a normal year, no matter what we thought in August.
Yeah. And so that work is really going to lay with the department heads at the high school. So it's been great. Gabe and I have been going to the admin council meeting. So to hear the conversations that are happening between the department heads and the feedback that they're getting from educators, that's all going into next steps at the high school as well.
And we've heard some of that at full school committee as well, directly from the students and our student liaison, that this is an ongoing concern. And I think that's a good balance, but also understanding that curriculum can be rigorous, even if we're slowing down and going deep. It's not a less rigorous. So I want families to know that that doesn't necessarily translate to less rigorous instruction, just being more very mindful of what kids need right now. So I'm sorry, I was asking if anybody had questions. I saw Stephen and then Suzanne. Do you want to go ahead?
Suzanne, I think your hand up was first.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Suzanne, would you like to go first?
Well, actually, I thought Stephen was up first. I mean, saw his hand. So, and are you on the committee, Stephen? I mean, I'm just a guest, so I don't want to.
I am. So
Right
I'll ask a couple questions. So thanks for this, Michelle and Leslie. Just a couple questions. Michelle, the document that you shared, the Massachusetts Dyslexia Guidelines, is this adapted from a DESE document, or is this?
Yes.
Or it is.
Yes, so there's a DESE document that looks like this, that is online on the DESE website.
Okay, so there's a lot more robust information.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I didn't think that, we're not at that level of detail yet. We're at the level where we've really taken from that document, like the details we've taken from the document are about the specific criteria at each grade level that we'd be looking at. And so, I didn't think that you needed that, but I'm happy to share that.
No, I just wanted to understand what I was looking at. So two quick questions. One is, do you have a sense of how these dyslexia screening guidelines have changed since the last time DESE presented its recommendations? And also, it's very encouraging. I'm glad to see phonics up front here, but I didn't see anything on oral language in the screening summary that you sent around. Is that a significant part, oral language acquisition? Is that a significant part of you're ready to answer my question?
Yeah, so so I was just going to look. So these are like the high level overarching themes, but within them, they talk about how do you assess a student. And so there are oral language pieces within the guidelines that you are assessing, and the way in which you deliver the the way in which the student participates in the assessment. So I think what this really is are like the three high level areas that they're looking at, and just some of the pieces, the specific skill they call it, but the way in which they go about assessing it is through oral language in to get at it. So it's just that this is I didn't want to put all the information.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I won't get in the weeds.
Yep.
I know also that DESE has made specific recommendations around dyslexia screeners. Are are you reviewing just the recommended ones? Are you looking at a broader range?
Good
a narrower
question.
range?
So that we are looking in two places, because part of what's on the DESE site are their screeners in general, their literacy work in general. So it includes both dyslexia screeners and early literacy screeners for other pieces. So we looked at that list. In addition, we also looked at, and I'm going to get the name wrong, from the International Dyslexia, Casey, that'll help with the name, but we looked at the list there where they actually rate the strength of the screener against certain skills. And we're using both of those pieces of information to narrow our list to make sure that we are getting what we need. And so we thought some of those lists overlap, but in some places they don't.
Okay, so you're looking at IDA recommended stuff also.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
Just anything on that first comment about how DESE recommendations have evolved from the last screening recommendations to this one?
Yeah, so I might have to punt that to Casey for the specifics, because this is my first time through these guidelines. But Casey, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I don't. Stephen, are you referencing what they sent out a couple of years ago and then the more comprehensive set of guidelines?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're asking whether or not there are differences?
Yep.
I mean, it's certainly much more comprehensive in terms of what schools can and should be doing. I was actually a part of the working group that informed these guidelines. So it goes a lot deeper. I don't think districts got enough clarity a couple of years ago is when they came out, and there's much more specificity now.
Thanks, Casey and Michelle.
Yeah.
I see both Helen and Susan have questions. Suzanne, do you want to ask your question now, or do you want to wait?
I can let committee members go first. I can set a
You're
guess.
so polite.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Helen, I just happened to see your hand first, and then
Thank you.
Susan.
Thank you. I'm a little confused. First of all, thank you for this, but I thought we were already doing screening of dyslexia. I mean, there was something, a couple of years back, we started talking about this, right?
So within our current screeners, it screens for parts of what are included in the dyslexia screeners, but it doesn't screen for everything. And so what we're doing now is looking at where are those gaps and what are those skills that we haven't been screening for, and ensuring that we're going to get there.
So we are already identifying kids now with dyslexia.
Oh, clearly, yes. So I should have said
So I
that.
think that's important, that people
Yeah.
don't think we're just starting this
Of
and,
course.
you know, that we
No, of
haven't
course.
done it.
So I can
Thank
jump
you.
in
Yeah.
here, Michelle, a little bit. So Nadine Gabb, who's one of the leading researchers on dyslexia, actually came to Brookline and did a talk for us a couple of years ago. But her most recent research shows that there's a real genetic component to dyslexia. Forgive me for not remembering the exact percentages, but I think kids who either have a sibling or a parent who has dyslexia, they're at risk also of having dyslexia at a rate of, like, I think 50 or 75%. And because of this genetic component, I think a lot of her work impacted what DESE put out for dyslexia guidelines for districts. So yes, while we have been evaluating for it, and obviously we have a program, we have other capacities within homeschools to provide kids with services, we're not capturing all of the students potentially at risk with these weaknesses. And so this is really casting a much wider net. There was something else. Oh, to your question earlier, is that, so like at BEEP, and I think in kindergarten, we were capturing some of the early literacy skills that are components of dyslexia, but one of the pieces that we weren't capturing was rapid naming.
Mhm.
And so that's something that we're looking for to ensure that the screener captures this piece too, because we know that that is an important skill that students students with the dyslexic profile have deficits in that area.
So I'm sorry, just to follow up on what you were saying, do we do anything to check on family history for dyslexia?
I think that for students who are referred, and I don't know if this is consistent, I know that our school psychologists are trained on this. And so it's when a student is going through an evaluation for special ed, we might ask that as part of background information, but we don't currently ask anything like that, let's say out of the Office of Registration and Enrollment.
But the screener might be, the way to, I don't know. There may be
Yeah.
some way to get, let parents know you're doing it. And if there is someone in your family or you yourself have it, I mean, we might as well sort of short circuit it if we know that there's such a high percentage.
Yeah, I'd have to look into what the confidentiality
No,
regulation.
they're giving you the information.
Well, we have to ask if, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I think, I mean, certainly check it out.
Good, for sure. Yeah, that's important.
Okay,
Can I
but
just say
that was
before-
important to me to know that we're already doing stuff. It's not like we're starting at zero. And I think people need to know that also in the public. Thank you.
Jennifer, before we
it-
move on to the other
oh.
comments, can I just say really quickly, I think Helen asked what to me is the key question, which is, look, we already are doing something. So to me, the top level takeaway is that we're currently choosing a much potentially stronger screener, so that we'll be able to identify students with reading deficiencies much more early than we have in the past. This to me is the crucial point. Like, we've used a screener that had a lot of holes previously, as far as I could tell, or that had it wasn't resting on the strongest evidence base as it evolved. Now we're choosing one that has a much more up-to-date evidence base that's much more robust and comprehensive.
Well, I want to be really clear, though. We're not losing our other screener, our other assessment. We are still using the BAS. We're adding to it.
Thank
Well,
you.
and I think that is right. That is part of why this is going to take time, is we want to think about how this will interact with the BAS. And if we do need to look at alternative assessments, I mean, I think that is all part of this process, because at the end of the day, this is only going to be as good as our teachers' ability to carry this out with fidelity as it's supposed to be carried out. And so we want to make sure that we're really setting them up for success. And, I'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the literacy piece of things, or the literacy piece of the agenda, is for our K-5 teachers. I'm just very mindful of what we're asking them and what we could potentially be asking them to change in a short period of time and learn. And so I'm just mindful of that, because I don't want a failed rollout.
I know Susan has her hand up, but the BAS isn't meant to screen for dyslexia, is it?
No, not specifically. However, it has some of the components already within it. And that's like where Casey was saying, like, it doesn't have rapid naming. And so that's one component we know is missing.
Okay.
Susan, you've been super patient.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to. Just on the BAS, I'm sure people saw the study that came out last week about Fountainus and Fountainus Pinel, which follows the Lucy Calkin study. I don't know why I can't talk today. So I'm wondering if we can just talk to that a little bit, given the ratings, which are, I think, fairly, conversation provoking at a minimum, and just sort of how we're thinking about that. And you might get to this in the literacy section, but since we were talking about the BAS now, it just may be worth sort of starting here.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And we are going to talk about that when we get to the literacy presentation. Is it okay if we save?
Yeah, no, that's fine, as long as we're
Then, but
gonna save
it's a
it.
very valid point. It's on people's minds.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's definitely on my mind as soon as I saw the sort of alarming email. The second thing was, can you just, I think there are a lot of really important points that we went over quickly, one of which was, and I think Jennifer, this was yours, in addition to the ones that have been named already. Jennifer, I think this was your point of just, slowing down doesn't necessarily mean less rigorous. I think that's going to need a lot of messaging, given sort of where last year was and how people felt about sort of the slowing down and the rigor. I don't think anyone would disagree that, social emotional supports are needed and are, or much more urgent priority than even people thought before. And it was a pretty important priority before, but just sort of what the magnitude of that is. But at the same time, I'm not sure that they necessarily put those two pieces together. And so I do think it would be helpful if we had some sort of clearer, guidelines about what it means to go deep, right? What does it mean to, like, if you're not reading 8 novels, you're reading 6, but that's okay, because here's the richness of the conversation that we're having about those 6 and about character and theme and the bottom, for the little kids, the bottom of the wheel. And like, I think that some tangible examples of that will be really important, the concrete examples, because otherwise I think people are absolutely going to hear, what do you mean slow down? Like, we've been slow down for a year and a half, and because it does sound less rigorous. And so I just think that some examples of what going deeper means will be important. And then my last question was on the working group, Michelle, that you mentioned. Can you just tell us, we don't have to name names, but like positionally, who's included, what kinds of folks are included?
So obviously Casey and Leslie are there, curriculum coordinator for ELA. There's a coach for ELA who also is a reading specialist. We have
Special directors.
Yep, special ed directors, and that includes special ed director of social emotional learning.
Right. So 2 out of the 3 special education administrators who are present also have expertise in dyslexia. One wrote his thesis on it and his PhD thesis, and then the other has a graduate certificate in dyslexia.
Yeah,
that's great. Do we have any elementary teachers with a background in dyslexia?
We're going to bring teachers in for the feedback part. This is really solely just to get to really pull out a smaller set of tools to look at. And that's why we have perspectives coming from both OTL and OSS to get it, because I think we come at it with a different view and a different lens, and therefore we want to get that, and then we'll cut it down. But there is a feedback loop that we're planning to do. So teachers and I am sure that, with the number of teachers, I am sure there are people with backgrounds who have studied it in the district.
Yeah, it just may be worth thinking about if we do have, elementary teachers with dyslexia in their, dissertation or in their, master's thesis. I think and we can sort of add someone to the core team of just how the issues are framed and how it may be worth thinking about adding that sooner rather than later, because I think there's a different role for someone who's on a working group all the way through a project, and then people who are brought in for focus groups along the way. It's just sort of a different valence. So I would just be something I would consider.
Yep. And can I throw something out there also, Susan, to your other question? I don't know, Leslie, if you were going to jump in about the rigor. So I think it's really important to know that the decisions for reducing the content, and it's really about the amount of stuff we put in front of students, are done really thoughtfully and with a protocol to identify like what's the most high leverage for students in terms of this year and moving forward in the future. And we do it that way because we know that, like, if students' social emotional needs aren't being met, they're not prepared to take in any of the content. So just throwing more content at them only raises that anxiety level. So I think we just have to keep that in mind, and that we will use a protocol. And we have a lot of the work done from last year because we had to step back and do this a year ago, or a little over a year ago, when we came back and we were in the hybrid. So I think it'll be a happy medium between the hybrid and where we're at right now.
Okay, I just want to keep us a little bit on track. Suzanne hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and then let's see if Stephen has a question, and then hopefully we can address further questions during the literacy presentation piece, if that sounds reasonable. Suzanne, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for this presentation. I'm excited about the work. I just wondered, I was thinking the way Helen is thinking. I know we do things already. We have screening assessments already. There's work that we've done. And I'm just wondering how this screener kind of relates with thinking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions. Do we just add a piece to our current assessments we're doing? Is it an additional screening that we would do? And only for those who have tried, who would it be for? The tier 2 kids who've already tried something extra, the tier 1 who aren't getting it? I'm just
So-
How is that big picture?
So the term is a universal screener. So, you know, we haven't determined what that means yet, except for that it is coming into tier 1 that we are going to look at students where they start, and just like we do with the BAS. And I think to Leslie's point, we don't know if this is in addition, or are we looking at a tool that will capture enough information that, you know, so it capture enough information that will allow us to use that tool. So I think that there's some things that we have to really learn about the work, but it's not wait until a student is struggling to put a screener in front of them. It really is to look at, so like Casey was talking about, students come out of BEEP and we already have some information. And I think this is just added information to that to ensure that we're casting the wider net and catching students earlier.
So, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, I'm ever so mindful of how much time we take away from teaching when we're doing assessments. And I understand assessments have value. I'm not saying that, but I just, you know, if we're doing whatever we're doing for a screening, and then we add an additional screening, you know, how does that take away from the teacher's time to be in front of the students and teaching? And I also, you know, I just want to be mindful that, you know, dyslexia means different things to different people. And I'm just, again, mindful of how parents will react to your child is being screened for dyslexia.
So I just
want
want
to
to
understand what that means.
I want to, yes, I want to remind us of two things. It's a screening more for at risk, who's at risk, and dyslexia could be one of those pieces that they're at risk for. So I hear you on that. And I think that does need to be communicated really clearly with parents. I do want to say that one of the criteria we have is the ease and time and a dashboard that it takes to get this information. So I agree with you. The idea is not to spend a lot of time assessing students so that we can spend the time in front of them, providing them with what they need. So I appreciate that completely. And we captured both of those criteria within our tools, looking at like, how long does it take to do, who administers, how much time does it take away from the classroom? So yeah, thank you. No, thank you.
Okay, Stephen, you have one more question and then we'll go on to the RFP and then we can come back to literacy, I think, again.
Yeah, I know we'll come back to this. I just wanted to echo something that Susan said just now when she was asking you about the advisory group, Michelle. I just want to say, first of all, it's like a great wave of relief is washing over me as I'm listening to you and Leslie talk about this and how we're going to get this right in Brookline, because I think so many parents who've been through the process of trying to identify dyslexia in their students have found it to be very difficult. And it's really encouraging to hear that the district is moving forward on this and you're being so thoughtful about it. I just wanted to add, along with Susan, that I think we have an unbelievable quantity and quality of experts in our community. And I want to make sure, Michelle, that the folks you select, that you have all the experts you need. I'm thinking, for instance, like I know Ola Palchik is someone who studied with Marianne Wolf, and she lives in our district, and she's been very outspoken about literacy instruction. She's a literacy scientist here. And there are a number of others. So I also would like to support you in making sure that you can identify all the expertise you want to find in determining what screener is right for us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, well, everyone got to all my questions, so I don't have any questions now. So I guess we'll move on to the update on the RFP process for middle school review.
Sounds good. So I got, as Leslie identified earlier, a whole lot of feedback from a whole lot of sources. So first of all, thank you to all of you for your feedback. And then, yeah, I mean, BU leadership and the handful of teachers that they brought had some significant feedback. The curriculum coordinators had a whole set of feedback. And as Leslie mentioned, we just got it to principals just because of the timing. So I'm still waiting a little bit and giving a little bit of time. So that's kind of the caveat that I'll talk through today, is that I think we're really close. I just want to make sure principals have a fair chance before we send it off. So really where I'm at is, giving a little bit more time for principals, doing a final editing pass, depending on their feedback and the nature of it. And then ideally, I think we can post the RFP right around December 1st. I would probably be ready earlier. It's just the folks in our procurement department, get to take holidays just like all of us. And so I just don't predict it'll be faster than December 1st, but maybe it will be. But then I think realistically, I'm creating a due date for proposals on January 1st. I know the holiday's there, so we'll see what we get, and we can extend that deadline if we don't feel like we have a robust set of proposals, and should be able to turn them around pretty quickly, and assuming all things go smoothly, get a start right around February 1st. Kind of that's the rough timeline, but like with all things, we want to make sure we get useful proposals, and just like we would with a hiring process, if we don't like what we see, right, we can send it back out, or we can engage different folks. If we can't negotiate a contract with someone, even if we like their proposal, right, we'll send it back out and make it right. I think the nice thing about this is we create our own sense of urgency. Obviously there's community urgency on it, but we're not under any sort of arbitrary deadlines from the state or the federal government or anything like that. And so we can make sure we're doing this thoughtfully. I do have a revised copy. I don't know, given the nature of the document, how useful it is to necessarily share it, but I can kind of summarize the feedback. And then if folks have more specific thoughts or questions, I can kind of engage there. As we would expect, each sort of constituent group had their own bent on things, right? As is totally reasonable, right? Union leadership had a lot of questions about, investigating working conditions and teacher workloads and things of that nature. Curriculum coordinators had questions about how we ensure, full-time for all subject areas or their subject area, as I would expect. As you all in school committee had a lot of kind of higher level, broad, big picture questions, right? Which again is kind of the nature of your work. Members of senior staff similarly were making sure we had kind of alignment all the way through it. A lot of questions about kind of the operations and the budgeting side of things and the staffing side of things. And so I was able to combine a lot of that. I actually took some feedback from every single constituent group, which sort of feels good in a box checking sort of way, but it was also authentic and meaningful. I think folks really took it seriously. And so some of that showed up in the guiding questions. So there's some reframing and rephrasing in the guiding questions. There are a couple additions. In particular, Steve, you took the deliverables and formed them into a chart, which I found really, really helpful. So I incorporated that, just made the whole thing much clearer. And I think overall, what I saw was sort of trying to draw a balance between like an investigate what we have right now so that we can just kind of name and define what currently exists. And then the desires of, well, please offer us recommendations, like give us suggestions, like what can we do better? And I don't necessarily see a tension with that. I think they're both parts of a single larger holistic process, because as a district administrator who's going on his 8th year in the district, it would be hard for me to name all of the different pieces of our middle school model right now. And I have some of my own opinions about what we could do to make changes. And so I think, it's a multi-part process of naming what we currently have, using the consultant to ask for recommendations in light of what we want, which requires a process of coming together and doing some collective vision work, but then also what we could have in comparison to other districts or research or models from really anywhere. I mean, I'm trying to keep a very open mind. And then really considering what do we want to do about that then? We can get whatever recommendations we want, but we should also have a thoughtful process about selecting which recommendations we decide to adopt and which we decide to reject and don't think are right for us, or we can't do right away and maybe require a longer, more thoughtful process. And so this RFP, again, I think is for the first stage of that. And as a district, and especially as we see Dr. Guillory's strategic plan come through, we can kind of continue to mold this process. I don't see this as a quick fix. I see this as the long, sort of deep, thoughtful work to really investigate where we're at and potentially re-envision what we provide so the students have a really excellent experience all the way through and show up in 9th grade in really good shape. So I'm happy to kind of field questions, and I can bring up the document as well if that's useful. I'm seeing Helen.
Yeah, I was just remembering when we've done in the past program review, we've had a real robust way of looking at a program. And I'm wondering if you're thinking of doing that with the middle school program. I mean, you sort of, with the consultant, have laid out some of it, but I'm just wondering if that's your thoughts or.
I think in a short way, yes, in terms of robustness, but not necessarily modeling the exact processes we've used before. I think a big distinction is we're looking at things slightly different when we think about like the middle grades, and it's different than a curriculum review, right? Where we can kind of go a little bit more narrowly. We have questions about staffing, and we have questions about programming and curriculum. We also have questions about electives, and we have questions about intervention and, when do students get pulled from classes, or do we schedule things? And so I think the nature of the thinking has to be a little bit different, but the idea of a thoughtful, inclusive model that brings in all our various constituents is definitely still what we're going.
Because I think that would be really critical, parents being one of the constituents.
Absolutely.
Being very important.
Yeah, I mean, I've listed in there students, recent graduates, educators, administrators, families, community members who may not have children currently in the schools, like really trying to take a broad look.
And just one other piece, are we looking at, could this be done instead of doing with the full RFP process, posting it for 3 weeks and all that stuff? Is it possible to just go out for 3 bids for, to get to the same point and make it a much more streamlined?
I think that's possible. I think given the nature of the work, it's not as simple to identify organizations.
Or people, could be
or
just
people,
a facilitator type person.
I think the nature of
Who
it's
has
too
knowledge?
big for an individual. I think an individual would have a really difficult time doing this fully. I think there's going to need to be multiple streams going on at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Couple things. Gabe, thanks for sharing that with us. First of all, I thought the way you described the objectives of this consultancy was dead on. I mean, it just described the kind of middle school experience that seemed to align really well with PSB values and then some. So thank you for that. I have 2 smallish questions. One was the modality of the technical assistance that we're looking for. In the initial draft I saw, it was more like we were looking for a partner to accompany us as we were changing the middle school model. And that concerned me a bit because it seemed open-ended and potentially open to scope creep. So I was wondering what you thought about the idea of really requiring the offerer to deliver an analysis and final proposal and recommendations that can be fully reviewed, rather as like a concrete final deliverable that we can or cannot integrate into our shifts as we see fit. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
I think at this stage, for this particular RFP and the funds we have currently budgeted, that is my sense of a final deliverable.
Okay, great.
I think in the grand scheme of what we need to do in the district to make middle school right, there's more work after that. But okay. I would want to define that work based on the initial set of recommendations.
I mean, could we have something like that and then have open the potential to mod the consultancy for like an operational roadmap after the recommendations were delivered and considered and reviewed and approved or something like that, so that that partnership could really be subsequent to the delivery of recommendations?
I think that's possible. I think that honestly, the major consideration is the difficulty of multi-year budgeting under our current structure.
I see. Okay, and then my other question for you is, just Helen and Susan could probably answer this question for me. What's the process for disseminating this broadly? Like, I'm assuming we're going to look outside of Massachusetts as well for consultancies with expertise specifically in middle school model design, and we're finding that what's our network for blasting out this RFA? How do we do this? Is my more simply?
Yeah, so there are like national websites where you can post and make it available. We've worked with actually Mike D'Onofrio has the kind of background and skill set. He's in the student services department and kind of a finance role. But we also have to work with town, leaves the purchasing department.
But I mean, specific to middle school design ideation, like, is that the networks that he has access to, or is this more generic education?
No, these are the
providers?
Yeah, these are like the generic, broad, like educational research. Like clearinghouse is the wrong term, but it's what's coming to my mind right now.
I mean, I almost wonder if we could invite some specific potential bidders to like a road show where we talk about the RFA and encourage their application, just to solicit the expertise of non-generic education education technical assistance providers.
Yeah, we can certainly court specific bids as well.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions on the update for the RFP at this time? I think people have had an opportunity to provide some feedback, and sounds like Gabe's gotten quite a bit. Are we good? All right, so I think we're ready to move on to the final item on our, we do have new business listed, but our final large piece of work for tonight, which is the presentation on literacy, teaching, and learning. Leslie, am I turning this over to you?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. So,
Thank you, Gabe.
you know, I was really pleased that this is coming up on the agenda. I feel like, I feel like it's really great to have an opportunity to present what is happening in Brookline around early literacy. I think that we have a number of strengths. I also think we have some areas for growth that we recognize. And I think this is also timely given the release of the ED reports on the Calkins units of study and the Fountas and Pinnell. I know that when I first read it, my heart jumped a little. But we want to, we've been taking a lot of time to comb through those reports. I've been taking a lot of time to talk with other assistant superintendents of teaching and learning to hear how they're dealing with this, because these are curriculum that are used in many districts, and there's a lot of benefit to these curriculum. But we just want to also be sure that when there are gaps, that we are finding ways that we fill those gaps so that we're not leaving any child behind. And so the first thing I'd like to do is, unfortunately, Joanna Lieberman, our director of ELA, couldn't be with us. She had a middle school department meeting today and then had some meetings after that. So I did ask her just to prepare a short video that just gives an overview of early literacy. And then we want to jump into just some thoughts we have, some questions we have, and some next steps that we're considering, and then open it up for questions.
So are you ready for the video?
We're ready, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay.
And the video is I think it's about 10 minutes.
Yep.
Good afternoon. This recording is intended to provide an overview of reading, writing, and
Michelle?
skill instruction
You
in the
can't see
public
it?
schools of Brooklyn.
You don't see it? Let me try one more time. Hold on. Go back. Try one more time. Share screen. Okay. Do you see a black screen now?
Yes.
Good afternoon. This recording is intended to provide an overview of reading, writing, and foundational skill instruction in the public schools of Brookline. As you can see from the graphic we will be anchoring our conversation in today, we aspire to structure and balance in our literacy programming, and I will talk about that briefly here. The first visual that you see is an overview of reading instruction. What you see is how we think about the two main components of ELA instruction, the content and the pedagogy. On the left, you see that we attend to our Massachusetts state frameworks. In reading, these frameworks compel us to provide experiences in reading literature and reading informational text. You see the standards on the left, which move from pre-K to 12 and become increasingly sophisticated over time. To support teachers in helping students meet these grade level standards, we have incorporated anchor curricular experiences in reading literature and informational text in grades K to 5. On the right, you see pedagogical practices, the structures that we use and make operative in the classroom. The colored shaded parts are the configurations we use. Whole group instruction, which is instruction and experiences for all students. Small group, which is targeted and strategic work for smaller groups, a powerful high leverage approach. And individual instructions where teachers work one-on-one with students around next steps and areas for growth. Furthest to the right, you see common recognized approaches that match up with those configurations in workshop instruction and in managed independent learning settings. You'll see, for example, interactive read aloud, where a teacher shares a text with the entire class, pausing to make instructional decisions and moves, and then inviting students to interpret the texts shared and try out some of the thinking in conversation with partners and with the whole group. You might also see shared reading, which is an invitation for teachers that teachers offer to our younger students in K to 2 to come and participate in the reading of a collective text. And you see mini lessons or explicit instruction that move readers forward in their process and strategies. You see in small groups, you might have instructional groups that are strategic in nature, guided reading where students come together around a particular text, or book clubs where teachers coach into interpretive conversation. And there's individual work. In kindergarten through 2nd grade, you might see center work where students are moving independently around the room. And in our older grades, you may see independent reading, writing about reading, or spaces where teachers are conferring with readers. Undergirding that work in reading is foundational skills. On the graphic, you see that as word study. And these are also in our standards. They are built as building blocks that help our students read, interpret, and make meaning from text. In order to be able to do that work in literature and informational text, students need that foundation, that work that helps them decode the text and make meaning from it. In kindergarten and 1st grade, those foundational skills are around print concepts, phonological awareness, the awareness that spoken language is made up of different smaller parts that can be manipulated, and phonics and fluency. In 2nd grade and up, that work concentrates itself in phonics work, word recognition, and fluency. And you see that that work localizes more around meaning making in decoding. So what do affixes, suffixes, and prefixes, and roots carry as meanings of words? In kindergarten through 2nd grade, we have put in place over the last 4 years Foundations, which is a multi-sensory phonics program. All teachers in those grades have access to the program. Teachers in kindergarten and 1st grade have had formal district-based training in that. And in 2nd grade, those plans to train 2nd grade teachers were upended by the March 2020 closure. We were able to take advantage of our technology-focused instruction early on last year during the pandemic and provide training for 2nd grade teachers through the development and use of resources for units and foundations created by Brookline teachers. So there has been some of that with the hopes of being able to do a more formal training process this year. In grades 3 to 5, we have had Words Their Way in place for teachers as a resource for over a decade. Words Their Way does a good job of identifying those phonics skills emphasized in the standards, working on affixes and derivational relations, roots from Latin and Greek, but it takes a good deal of time. And we are in the process of determining whether it is the ideal extension for students who have had a comprehensive multi-sensory phonics program for 3 years, kindergarten through 2nd grade. We currently in the district have teachers who are exploring foundations in 3rd grade as a potential. We also have teachers who are working with the upper grade version of Lexia to see whether that might provide a logical extension. And we've committed a study group strand of our literacy specialist work to determining what the ideal extension of that foundations work would be in 3rd grade and up. When you move into writing instruction, you notice a parallel in terms of structure with content and pedagogy. The main difference that I would draw your attention to is in writing, our standards focus on text type. There are 3 text types that are expected of all students and their teachers in K to 12. Those are opinion pieces, information and explanatory text, and narrative. And there's an emphasis on structure and organization and devotion to the writing process. Again, you see whole group, small group, and individual configurations, much the same. The most obvious difference being the insertion of interactive writing with our youngest writers, which is an invitation really to share the pen and have students participate in the co-construction of shared text. We have put word study work underneath writing instruction too, because decoding and encoding is two sides of the same process, and also important in our work with students in writing. I would add that we have indicated in our essential curriculum that we have 3 anchored units of study in reading and 3 in writing. We have asked that there be 1 unit in each 3rd of the year. So for example, September to December, January to March, April to June. The units that go along with our standards aligned content average about 18 sessions, which runs to about 4 weeks of instruction if you teach reading or writing 5 days a week, and 5 weeks if you teach it 4 days a week. We've placed these anchored experiences deliberately across the year in these chunks of a 1/3 of the year at a time. So there is ample time for teachers to build additional courses of study that honor their autonomy and choice and allow for appropriate cross-curricular and other studies. Foundational units, however, are expected to be taught 4 to 5 times a week throughout the year. The work that we have in literacy in the public schools of Brookline is grounded in the idea that teachers must be supported in understanding that reading, writing, and language use is a complex and varied process. And we expect that they must use their skills in understanding that complexity to make meaning from about the decisions that they are making to support students to tackle increasingly complex texts and tasks over time. Our work is anchored in a strong foundation of oral language development, and we work to allow many opportunities for students to do thinking and talking about their literacy across the day. We believe students deserve opportunities to read, write, and use their language for real-world purposes and to be engaged in meaningful, relevant learning opportunities. And we ask that teachers use a variety of data sources to make informed decisions about what students need next. At this point in our programmatic examination, we believe we have several areas for growth. One is obviously the logical extension of words study in grades 3 to 5. What do our students need next is an important question that we're asking and exploring. We also know that vocabulary instruction is critically important, and it's so important that it cannot live solely in the literacy block. It has to be shared broadly and deeply by other content areas. So we need to think about what is the best way to approach that, where does that time come from, and where does that cross-curricular understanding come from? We are also continuing to reflect on our text collection. We have brought in a number of decodable texts into our youngest grades. We must continue to expand that so that students have the opportunity to practice those phonics skills in texts. And we are committed to addressing the diversity in our text collection, both in content and in authorship, so that students see themselves and see others in the text that they interact with on a daily basis. Our goal is always to continue to find time and space for continuous learning for educators so that they can support continuous learning in our students. And we are excited about the work that is to come.
Thank you, Michelle. Do you mind? Thank you. Perfect. So we just wanted to present that. Oh, and it looks like Joanna is just joining us. Good timing. So we wanted to, just give an overview of the work that's happening. And then just share again what, Joanna very clearly outlined, just some of our areas for growth. I think, a lot of folks have been talking about the science of reading, and we know that that's a place specifically in our upper elementary grades where we're still kind of looking at options, and what we know is critically important is that we are consistent with this work and that we're coordinated. And so we're really hoping to get to a place where we are consistent and coordinated across K through 5 in the phonics work. So we're feeling good about the work in the K to 2 where we have foundations, but it's not as solid in the upper grades. And so we're thinking about how we get there. I think another place is the specialists are such an asset to the public schools of Brookline. It's really nice to work in a district that has put resources towards that student-facing position. And so one of the things that IDA might allow us to do, and not might, it will allow us to do, we just really want to venture into this with our specialists, which we haven't done yet, is giving them more training, training in interventions beyond LLI, but Orton Gillingham, so that our specialists have a wider range of tools that they can share. Many of our specialists are trained in multiple programs, but it shouldn't be that, it's the luck of the draw on who you get and what they're trained in. We want to have something that's more consistent and uniform across our schools. So we're working with Casey around that. And I probably should stop talking and let folks ask questions at this point. I will just say, what we're really striving for is a balanced approach to literacy. We know that our kiddos are going to come into this with different needs, and we want to be able to address those needs. And, as the mom of a 4th grader, I know that this is a really pivotal time in terms of instruction, literacy, and so we want to make sure that we're prepared to support all of our students. Any questions?
Susan?
Yeah, no, thank you for this. Couple thoughts. One is if we can just go back to the recent report on fondness and now, I think a number of the things you mentioned, we've already worked around. If I, as I read the report and as I think about the things that we have done, like phonics instruction and whatnot, where there were weaknesses identified, I just think that it's such a big, I mean, the fact that at no grade level did not meet expectations. So I just think it's important to identify where are the places where we've identified weaknesses in the program and either what we're doing about it or what we're thinking about to fill the gap, since it just came out last week. So that was just one, if we can talk about that. The second one is if we could talk a little bit more about the interdisciplinary nature of this. I think one of the things that, we've always talked about is that not all reading has to be in an ELA unit. It can, nor should it be. It should be in other units as well, even when they're still learning to read. And so I think would be helpful for us to understand, because I think otherwise it sounds like we have to spend so much time on ELA to the exclusion of other subjects. And so I think it would just be helpful for us to understand how you are combining reading instruction or reading, interpretations in particular with time spent on other subjects. So be my second question. And my third question is on diversity and representation. I definitely appreciate that it was mentioned. I think it'll be helpful just to understand a little bit more about what that means. What kinds of representation are we looking for? How do we know if we've gotten there? Yeah, so I think that one just needs a little bit more. I need to understand a little more, but thank you for this.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll try to or start to address some of those questions, Susan. So I think, it's exactly what you said. We're still really digesting the ed reports and what that means. What we know is that we don't want to put forth a model that has deficits, but we also want to be very thoughtful about how we move. Because if you think back even to prior to the adoption of investigations, when we stopped using Think Math, our teachers didn't have a curriculum to work from. And our teachers are very skilled. The curriculum, although it helps us make sure that there is consistency across schools, across classrooms. And so I don't think we're at a place where we're ready just to pull, we're not just pulling curriculum, but we're just thinking about what we have, where are the places that we may need to make changes. And again, we just want to be coordinated and thoughtful about that. Not that we're not willing to make changes, we certainly are. The other thing, again, I just have to keep saying I'm really mindful of is that this work is done by educators. So they're the ones who are really going to carry this on their backs. And I'm mindful that right now we're going through a K-5 investigations implementation. And so we're asking teachers to collaborate and learn and change some of their practices with that new curriculum. And so especially in the life of a K-5 a teacher that deals with all the content areas, we're just trying to be very strategic about what we're asking of them, when and how. And so, there's just a lot of work to be done there. And I think it's the same thing that applies to the interdisciplinary work. A lot of that's the way of the future, right? But that takes planning. And so we really aren't in a place at this moment where we have done that planning to roll something out substantial across our K-8 schools. But that's something that we need to talk about, and we need to talk about with Joanna and all the other coordinators around what's our next step around that piece. So I don't have a clear action step for you there, but I guess I do have a clear action step, is to have a discussion amongst the curriculum coordinators about what this means and what we should be thinking about next. In terms of the diversity of text, I think back to when Beverly Daniel Tatum came to our PD day, and she said, when you look at a picture, what's the first thing you look for? And you look for yourself. And it's not just looking for yourself, but you want to see yourself looking good in that picture. And so that's really what I'm thinking about when we think about the diversity of text or in our text is, can every child in our district see themselves in the curriculum, and do they see themselves looking good, right? So for our, just as an example, and speaking from the perspective of an African-American woman, I want to see Black people that aren't slaves. Yes, we need to learn about that history, but we also need to know about the incredible contributions that they made to this world. And so making sure that our texts exemplify that. So in terms of diversity, at least that's my perspective. And I think that that's shared amongst Joanna and our other leadership curriculum coordinators. Does that answer your question, Susan?
It did. I think one thing that might be helpful is just to follow up on those, I think for the identifying the gaps in the literacy curriculum based on the research, I think maybe we can just come back to that one. And after everyone's digested a little bit more, I'm 100% mindful that we don't want to roll out too many things at once, because there's so much, people are so overwhelmed as it is. Nobody wants to get more overwhelmed, but it's also true that we don't want the gaps, as you said. So I think I guess what I was trying to ask was if there are strategic or targeted places where we said, this is what the report showed, and this is what we need to fill. And good news, we filled some of them already because we identified that also. But here are kind of the 1 or 2 modules or, bolt-ons or something that we have to do differently, mindful that just exactly to your point, we can't roll out a whole new curriculum, nor should we. But just what that targeted priorities are. I would say the same thing is true about the interdisciplinary work, because my guess is that it's happening already in some places organically, or lots of places organically, where where we know that there's either a block schedule, for 2 classes together, or we know that, in literacy instruction is really built into a social studies unit or whatnot. And my guess is that even just gathering what's out there already and making that available, there just might be low hanging fruit on that one, because you're absolutely right to do something substantial K-8. We don't need another initiative. I just want to make sure that it doesn't sound like every time we prioritize literacy, we're taking time away from other things. I would rather just make sure we're always identifying how we can work it in. And then I would say the same thing about the diversity piece. I think if there are particular aspects of diversity that we're looking for, like race, like gender stereotypes, like LGBTQ, like ableism, like intersectionalities among those, if there are certain things we're looking for, like, how do we know if we've done it? How do we know if what would a curriculum for a 2nd grade look like that was diverse? So maybe just at some point when we get a little bit further into that, I think it would be helpful just to have that conversation about what does success look like for something like that. And if there's distance to go, kind of what we're doing. Anyway, sorry, but thank you. It was very helpful.
That's helpful. And I will say, in terms of the gaps that the report cited, there were a few of them, but I think the one that is overwhelming is the lack of a sequential research-based phonics program. Right. So I think with K-2 foundations, we have some of that, and especially because it was rolled out in a way where teachers receive professional development. And so it was rolled out in a coordinated way. And so when we're looking at grades 3, 4, and 5, and we say, well, we have words their way and teachers can access it, that's not coordinated. And so we're looking to have something that is coordinated, that students can rely on having access to, regardless of where they are. So at least for me, I'm thinking a lot about grades 3, 4, and 5, and also thinking about, how we support educators, or what support they might need to help them to apply the learning. So, I just talked about potentially having all of our specialists trained in Orton Gillingham, but also what does that mean for classroom practice, right? So that's one piece of it, but then it's how does a child then take what they've learned with the specialist and bring that into the classroom and apply it to the work they're doing, which means that also the classroom teacher has to have a really good understanding of that work that has happened outside of the classroom. So there's a lot of pieces, but just to answer your question, I think overwhelmingly it is certainly the phonics piece of things.
I just wanted to add on after with Susan's comments there, and just sort of thinking about future meetings. I think it'd be great if we could come back and talk when the district has had some time to digest the reports and think about next steps and gaps and things like that. Maybe we can come back and talk about that at a future meeting. And as well as, highlighting some of that great interdisciplinary learning that we're doing. That would be great to follow up on. And your next step was discussing among the curriculum coordinators. So the other piece that Susan was talking about was the diversity and representation. And I think that this rollout of the essential curriculum or the beginning of this work is a really good time for us to build in this kind of work from the beginning in the structure of it. So thinking about that curriculum, thinking about the texts that go with that, what do we want it to look like? This is a really good time to do that. And I'd like us to think about, and you may already have done a lot of this work already, but in the idea of building classroom libraries or school-based libraries and classroom libraries where we have books that are both mirrors and windows. So books that reflect students, but also provide windows for other students to when they're reading. So, and that has funding implications. So I guess as we enter in the cycle, just to be thinking about that. And then the other comment I just wanted to make at this point was about coordinating. You talked about coordinating 3 through 5 phonics as a continuum or a strategic and intentional practice from the K2, whether that's words that were, whatever that thing is. I also think it's important to think about coordinating between the phonics instruction in foundations with the materials students have access to in the classroom that support that. So that bridge from the phonics that they're practicing in foundations or whatever product or program or whatever curricula are being used into those, whether it's decodables or guided reading, whatever that looks like in the classroom, that those things are connected as well. I see, sorry, those are my comments for now. I see, and thank you again. This was, is very helpful, I think, in understanding the district's viewpoint and philosophy and current practice. Let's see, I saw Helen and Steve and then Suzanne. So I'm just working across the top of my screen here.
I don't know if Steve had his hand up ahead.
Oh, I didn't see order. Does anybody feel the pressing need to go next?
No.
Steve is graciously offering you the floor, Helen.
Thank you, Steve. So I have 2 questions, sort of just understanding what, because I don't know what it is. What is a decodable text? Somebody talked about that and I just don't know what it is.
Yep. So I can answer that, but I see Joanna's on the call. Do you want to answer that, Joanna?
Sure. A decodable text is a text that's written with kind of targeted language patterns that students are studying so that they match instructionally and enable students to encounter in print patterns that they're studying in their phonics program that make them eminently more decodable and then hence readable.
Are those like the ones that we saw sometimes when we went to visit, you know, those sort of primers that, I mean, it sort of reminds me of like the run spot run ones that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's what you're talking about.
It's kind of a burgeoning field. Increasingly more publishers are becoming involved. We've added a number of them from Flyleaf, which is a publisher that's built a lot of them. And increasingly they're trying to attend to content because a lot of them in the past have been criticized for being somewhat contrived because in an effort to try to match the language patterns that you're studying, it's kind of hard to make meaningful content. So I think that's improving. And as we find ones that are substantive and meaningful and more authentic, we continue to add them to our classroom libraries.
Okay, and the second piece that I just have a question about, I remember at some point that we heard about the cost of Fountas and Pinnell, and I'm wondering, you may not know this off the top of your head, but I'm wondering how much it costs us a year, because it's a program that costs every year, right? It's not like you learn it and then you just use it, right?
Joanna could answer this better than I can,
Yeah,
but I think the big cost is when we're training folks in that methodology. And so I think it really depends on how many people we're training a year, which I think this year is not that many. I think now, you know, we've had, you know, many people who have been in the district for some time, but I can get that information for this year. I'll actually get it for you for the last 5
If there's any other cost to the materials and stuff, I think somehow I remember that this was something that we kept on having to put money towards. It wasn't something, you know, you learn it, or even like our math program that is basically a free program, if I remember correctly. It's an open source type of program.
Yeah, one of them was illustrative math but
Yes.
investigations is not. So we do.
Right, the illustrative math, that's what
we pay and pay well for investigations.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll get that for this committee though, Helen. The F&P costs. Stephen?
Shall I? Thanks. So let me just start again by saying Thank you. I just feel really grateful that the district is at a point where we're taking a fresh look at our literacy instructional practices. I mean, it's a national conversation, it's a local conversation. There's a lot of heat in the conversation. I'm glad that we're having it so openly and thoughtfully. I have 3 comments I want to make, and I want to start with the big one. One is that listening to the presentation, I have a concern about our approach to rethinking our literacy instructional practices. And correct me if I misheard, I heard in Joanna's presentation a comment about exploring whether there's too much phonics in our instructional practices. I heard a comment about how our instructional practices are grounded in oral language, a comment about how our approach needs to be balanced. And what I wasn't hearing was that our instructional practices need to be fundamentally founded and need to be fundamentally evidence-based. Because it's my understanding, and I've heard this comment a little bit as well, but to me, it's the overriding fact of the conversation is that literacy instructional practices, good ones, have been determined and have been scientifically validated. And the extent to which we are or are not aligned with what we know well to be best practices, to me, is the challenge going forward. Where we're misaligned, that's where we have work to do peeling them back. Where we're aligned, we continue strongly. And it seems to me that we've made a tremendous amount of progress. I'm continually seeing how our literacy specialists at the schools are pushing forward with their knowledge, pushing their knowledge of good practices forward. But with that central point, my 2 side points are: one, it seems very evident to me, not just from this year's ed reports, but from the last 3 years worth of ed reports at least, that Lucy Calkins's reading workshop and the F&P resources, tools, and pedagogies we have are failing. They're failing our kids, and the extent to which we still have them is a problem. So I think we need to, I respect and support a moment of reflection and a careful planning process to determine next steps. But I think it has to include identifying where we're still using these resources, practices, and tools in our classrooms and figuring out how to root them out. And then the third piece is, I'm sorry that I'm on a soapbox, I'll get off in 1 second. On the diversity point, I think that's great that Susan raised it. But I think the overriding fact to me of inclusion when it comes to literacy is that good literacy instructional practices is itself equitable and inclusive, because it's the lack of strong reading instruction is what causes these inequities to develop. It causes them to widen. So I fully support more reading texts that are representative, but the by far the most significant step we can take to addressing inclusion and equity in literacy instruction is to make sure that it's evidence-based and phonics-based. So I'm saying all this because it seemed to me that the approach that was being presented was not focused on being evidence-based. It was focused on a number of things, including evidence, and that worried me. So I just wanted to voice my concern here for your consideration. And I do it respectfully, and I do it with real thanks about how you've approached this conversation, to Joanna, to Leslie, to Michelle, to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And we appreciate that. I mean, that is what is going to, those types of questions, that's what's going to get us to the next level, right? So we're not shying away from them. We want to hear them. We want to hear our educators' perspective, and want to hear our families' perspective around how what we're doing is working for children. We're committed to continuous review, continuous improvement of our practice. And I think one of the things that's triggering, let me speak for myself, is that as I'm reading through the different resources and curricula, and that's curriculum that we have or curriculum we don't have, everyone's done some research about how it works and who it works for. And so really, it's like doing this lit review, trying to figure out what to move forward with. I think, one of the things that I have been impressed with Lucy Calkins is one, just that she's admitting where the gaps are, right? I think she's been really reflective and recently has come out and said, listen, we got a gap here. Let's not play games. Let's put it out there. And so we're really trying to figure out, as new resources are created, are those resources that we want to use along with Calkins, or do we look at what else is out there? And so that's the question. And I think hearing from families and hearing from educators about how things are working, I suspect that when we do the K-5 scope and sequence reviews, that I'm going to hear a lot about how these tools are working for educators. And so we really want to dive into that. Just yesterday, we met with a middle school teacher that was, saying, listen, I enjoy the reading units, but these are some ways that there are challenges just in my practice that I'm having a struggle with. And so what I'm thinking is that something that we can tweak to make work for that educator, or do we need to continue to, always look and see what's there? So this is certainly a year where talking to folks with the middle school review, around literacy, around all these pieces, we need to do a lot of information gathering, a lot.
Thank you for that response, Leslie. That was characteristically really thoughtful. I would just recommend 2 specific next steps as the process goes forward. One is to make sure, Michelle, that your advisory group really does contain the literacy scientists that are in this community. Again, I'm thinking of Ola Pelchik, I'm thinking of Miriam Fine. They're brilliant people in our community who are knee deep in the evidence based on this. And the second one is, Leslie, I 100% hear you that the how is going to be difficult, is complex, has a lot of pieces to it, has a lot of people involved with it, has a lot of professional development. But I hope at least we could start from a place where we can acknowledge, I'm a Teachers College alumni. I know that Lucy Calkins is reflective about where she's been and where she's going, but I think we have to acknowledge the extent to which we're working with tools and resources that are not working right now, and we have to make sure that removing them from our classrooms is part of our action plan going forward. How we replace them or over what timetable, I recognize that's a complex issue, but I think we do have to take the last few years of reports on these materials very seriously. Thanks.
Thank you.
Suzanne, I see you have your hand up. Do you have?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Jennifer. Actually, Stephen, I'm going to just push back a little bit. I think there have been some really good things that both Fountas and Pinnell and Calkins have contributed to literacy and to the success of early literacy. So I would not want us to throw everything out and without looking at what works and what's really helpful to us. And also keeping in mind that, our children are all individuals and they need different things. And so, access to little books that are kind of fun and they can fly through is really encouraging to students who are early readers. And so, I'm not sure I would say it's been a complete failure, and I'm not sure I would say I would get rid of it all. I think there's some really good stuff there. So I'm pushing back a little bit. I know we're just having a little debate here. And the other thing the point I wanted to make, I'm going to channel Mr. Rogers, and that is play is the work of preschoolers and early schoolers, like kindergartners and first grade. And so, I know we're talking about early literacy, but play is a big part of that. Playing with words, playing with sounds, phonemic awareness is about rhyming and playing and segmenting and clapping out the syllables. Play is a part of vocabulary development and oral language. That's all really critical, as we've said, to early literacy. And so, I do hope that we're aware of the value of play and that we have opportunities for our children to explore in ways they may think is just school, but that's fun, engaging ways, and not ask our kindergartners and first graders to be 4th and 5th grade students, and just really to keep that in mind, that we talked earlier before the pandemic, our concern that science and social studies were getting short shrift, and I think they can very much play a part in early literacy, and I hope we will look at that and consider that. So thank you for all the work you're doing and all your thoughtfulness. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Suzanne. And that's a great point. So towards the end of the summer in August, DESE and who was it? Was the Massachusetts Administrators Association released a position paper on play in early childhood. And I thought it was really well done. It talked a lot about play as an instructional strategy to teaching standards. And so I shared that with the kindergarten teachers. I really should share it with pre-K to 2. So I will do that. But I thought that was a really good starting point for any conversations that we need to have around play and instruction, especially in our early childhood grades. Yes, Helen?
Come on, sometimes the clicker won't work. Sorry about that. I just wanted to pick up on that. I think, Suzanne and Leslie, you're absolutely correct. Play is critical for young kids. And I saw that, I have to shout out to Nicole Chassie, teacher at Ridley School, who has the most incredible setup in her class for play, but that's word-based. The kids, learn how to make change. They learn how to sell something. They have to write the menu. They have to, you could feel the learning there and see it. And so I know some other people here were with me in her classroom, and that's the sort of thing that I would hope we have in every classroom.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have great examples of that across the district.
I'm sure there are. I just happen to.
There are some amazing examples of that, Helen. And so, I'll shout out my Pierce folks. They do it's a social studies unit actually on community, where the kids, there's a bank, there's a nail salon, there's there was all kinds of stuff. I went and the kids gave me a hand massage, I had lemonade, but they made the signs for the stores. And then some of them were bank tellers and they were exchanging money. They would give you your money and then they would give you change. I mean, there's really the ability to do some of that really creative, meaningful work in our early childhood grades. So there's a lot of sharing of practice that we need to do because there's a lot of that work happening that's fantastic in this district.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Stephen?
Just real briefly, I just wanted to say, in response to Suzanne, I agree with you, Suzanne. I think some of the elements, like the ones you described, like the kinds of books that you were describing, they're often really wonderful for students, and students do have different needs. But I mean, there are, I think, pernicious parts of F&P or F&P influenced content, curriculum, resources, pedagogy. It could be like the leveled readers, for instance, are still really popular in a lot of our classrooms right now. My only point is that I work in educational development. The science on education is really inconclusive in almost every area of education, except literacy instruction, where I feel like the evidence base is really strong and it's been validated. So I just want to encourage us. I want that to be our touchstone when it comes to our reflection on literacy instruction and how to improve it going forward, is to make sure that we're using the best practices that have been widely confirmed. And again, I say that not as someone who just thinks we should always be turning to database practices for everything in education, but specifically for literacy instruction, I think it's critical that we do that. And that can include all kinds of, it could be play-based education, it could be a lot of different things. I'm repeating myself. Thanks.
Just keeping an eye on the time. Susan, do you want to go ahead and then we'll sort of work towards wrapping up and thinking about next steps?
And one question that people frequently ask about the literacy curriculum is, what do we do with readers who are a little bit more advanced? I think for a while there was a sense that when the benchmark assessment system was, when we were all in the building all the time, and that there was sort of a pause moment if readers were getting past 2 grade levels above where they were. And I think that was interpreted by a lot of people as not really understanding what those needs are beyond wherever the child is, not actually assessing where the child is. So I think one thing that might be helpful is as we do go through these various kind of looks again at literacy, really being able to communicate how this is working, how areas of development are being identified and for kids who are not struggling, and that they're so that we can communicate to parents what is the kind of sort of kind of pedagogy that they are getting. Because again, I think there's sort of a notion that with benchmark assessment system, it's sort of designed to find the kids who are really struggling and everybody else is sort of like, fine, go to your own book group. And we'll see you at the end of the year, where we also won't, you're already 2 grade levels ahead. We don't really have to do anything with you. And so I think just being able to help people understand what that educational experience is like to help develop or push kids, or encourage them at higher levels, not in a way, as we talked about at the very beginning, that stresses them out or anything, but just focuses on their development as well. So I think it'll be helpful when we come back to this to maybe talk a little bit more about that, because I know we're short on time now, unless there's a quick answer. But
well, I don't know if Joanna wants to jump, but I will give a quick answer. I think that within workshop, it inherently allows the teacher to differentiate, and it allows children to use varied text. So I think just the format of workshop, and that's separate from a curriculum, or that's just mini lesson, independent or guided practice, and then an opportunity to share or assess. I think that framework really supports that, but we certainly can talk more about specifics, Susan, when we come back together on this.
So on that note, I just want to sort of wrap us up and sort of think about where we're going. And thank you to Joanna Lieberman. I'm glad that you were able to join us and answer some questions for us, and for creating the video for us. That was really helpful for us to understand. And thank you to all of our staff members who are able to come and join us this evening after hours, so to speak, although I'm not sure in education, there really are after hours. So I really look forward to continuing our discussion going forward about our literacy instruction. And I'm really interested to hear the feedback that you gather as you work through sort of scope and sequence rollouts and talking with educators and coordinators about what's working well. So that we can continue the good work that the district is doing, and then revise, like any good writer or reader, to revise and make continuous improvements to our literacy instruction. So, and also I wanted to sort of highlight, when we talked before about that interdisciplinary learning, we were talking about play and great examples of our educators with great teaching and learning. There are really great examples of interdisciplinary reading and writing in some of our science and social studies units. So, I'd love for us to think about highlighting some of the great things that we're doing in the district in literacy as well, and things that are going really well for us as we continue to think about how we can, always be reflective, make revisions, and make continuous improvements to what we're doing. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you to everyone for coming. Does anyone have new business? It's on the agenda. Ms. Trelupski?
I'm looking at the calendar and looking at our next meeting, and it's December 21st. Is that a date we still want to aim towards, or would we be fresher on January 4th? I don't know.
Just hesitant to, it is, yes, I hear you.
I'm just worried about, I can make it, it's not a problem. But
yeah, no. We do have school that week until, right, I think until at least the later end of that week. So it is a school week. I hesitate we just seem to have a lot to discuss. We've already gone over time.
Okay.
But if we don't, but I'd be happy to reschedule it to a different date in December if other members feel like that might be a tricky time. I certainly want to make sure that, community members are available, but I'm hoping it's early in that week prior to the vacation that we could still meet.
No, it's Tuesday in the week, so it doesn't matter. It's fine.
Are you sure? Is there anyone who
Yeah.
thinks that might be a conflict? I certainly don't want us, I want us to be accessible. If folks think, okay. Thank you for bringing that up, Helen. It looks like we're okay. So we'll plan to do that. You know, that may be a great time for us to highlight some celebrations while people are having conversations about the work and thinking about reflecting on our conversations today and reports and things like that. I know we won't be ready to come back in December, so we'll talk and we'll set an agenda and we'll see each other again in December. Thank you. I really wanted to sort of shout out all of our attendees today. I really appreciate everyone coming and being part of this conversation. I know people are listening. It is being recorded and it will be available on Big. So if you know folks who wanted to come and couldn't make it today, please let them know that they'll be able to review this and the information that's posted through the agenda portal from the town. Any last thoughts anybody has before we close? All right.
Thank you,
Nice to
everybody.
see everyone. Have a great
Thank
night.
you, everybody. Appreciate
Everybody,
everyone.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
If we
Thank
don't
you.
see you.
Thanks, everyone.